Good afternoon, Forest Ridge. I am not a famous actress. Haven't written a book yet. Not a professional athlete, although I do play basketball every day. My name is Erin Jones, and I'm a world changer. And I have come today to share with you dreaming a dream that's bigger than me. So my talk for you today is going to challenge you to think about how do you dream a dream that's bigger than you. I have 3 principles that I want you to think about today as I talk, as I share my story with you. Number 1, it doesn't matter where you start, it matters where you finish. Number 2, every choice you make matters. You're going to make some mistakes. You're going to fall down on occasion. How are you spending your time before and after school, during school? Every choice you make matters. And lastly, I'm going to challenge you to be the best you can be. Don't try to be somebody else next to you. Don't try to be that supermodel on the magazine cover. You be your best you. And so I want to tell you my story about my dream that's bigger than me. And I'm going to challenge you as you hear my story to think about your own journey through life. And you all right now in this room are 9th and 10th graders, probably one of my favorite ages. I have 3 teenage children, 17, 18, and 19 years old. So I've walked through this period of time with them. And as you hear my journey through your age and through my children's age, I want you to hear as well the challenge to think bigger than yourself. I'm going to challenge you today to dream a dream bigger than the 6-figure salary, bigger than the nice car, the nice house, bigger than the nice shoes and the nice suits, bigger than the bling. I'm going to challenge you to be a world changer today. And so I want to back up with you almost 43 years. I don't look a whole lot different, huh? What's funny is, my hair looks the same, but I actually was very ashamed of this hair for many, many, many years. I was the only black kid in my school, everywhere, and I hated having hair that grew straight out of my head instead of that grew straight down. And so it's funny to see this now because I just made a very conscious choice about 1.5 years ago that I wanted young women to see beauty as not just straight, long hair. This is how it grows out of my head. I literally just washed it this morning and combed it, and this is what happens. But I want to back up with you 43 years. 43 years ago, when I was born in Minnesota, I was abandoned. I was actually born the product of an affair between a 60-something-year-old black man and a 20-something-year-old white woman. And back in Minnesota in 1970 and 1971, black and white didn't mix, and definitely didn't have children. Now, this was before abortion was legalized. And so my mother carried me to term, and then she gave me to the Children's Home Society, which is the equivalent of like an orphanage. Now, I was really, really fortunate. And 6 months after I was born, I was adopted by this man and his wife who happened to be sitting in the back of the room today. I brought my parents with me. They look nothing like me. So if you're looking for someone who resembles me, you're not going to find them in the room. But you know what? It doesn't matter where you start. It matters where you finish. I could choose to look at being in an orphanage as a disability, but I choose to see myself as a chosen one. I was chosen by a family. Doesn't matter where you start, it matters where you finish. We lived in a small town in Minnesota. I was one of the very few brown people in our entire region, in our entire county. There are more brown people in this room than there were probably for 100 miles where we lived. And so I can remember as a little girl, people touching my hair and looking at my skin. I was always different from everyone around me. And that was tough. It's tough being 3 and 4 years old and having people touch your hair and say, ew. Having people look at your skin and think it's dirty. That's a hard thing. But when I was 5 years old, my dad, who was a teacher, came home one night and he said, guess what, guys? We're moving to the Netherlands. The what? I don't know how many of you at 5 years old have heard of the Netherlands, but I had not. And I lived in Minnesota when my dad tried to explain to me it's across an ocean, I had no context to understand that. And so here I was, this little 5-year-old girl, and my dad said, we're moving to this place you know nothing of, but just trust me. And you know what? When you're 5, you don't get to choose where you move. You go where Daddy says go. And so we got on a plane, and we flew to this country across the water. And we landed in a place where it sounded like they were clearing their throats all the time. I don't know if you've ever heard Dutch before, but it's like German while clearing your throat. And I love Dutch. I love Dutch today. I still speak Dutch. But it was a very odd thing to suddenly be this family in a foreign land. But the greatest gift was that I got to go to one of the best schools in the whole world. A school very much like your school here. A school that today for kindergarten costs $30,000 a year. But I went for free because my dad taught there. And I got to go to school next to ambassadors' children. I got to meet my first princess when I was 9 years old. The Shah of Iran had just been assassinated, and his wife was traveling with a very famous American singer named John Denver. And he came to my school, my elementary school, and he decided to do a concert for the 4th grade class, and we got to sing with him. I was 9 years old. And I was chosen as one of 3 children to have lunch with John Denver and the Princess of Iran. Pretty amazing. And you know what I realized in that moment as I sat and had lunch with these 2 very famous people? I realized something that would transform the rest of my life. She was born into royalty. She had no choice about her destiny. She was born into money. She was born into privilege and power. He had an incredible talent that had blessed him. And I sat there talking to them at 9 years old, and I realized in my head, I am no different than them. I can be great too. And I remember very clearly at 9 years old thinking, I'm going to change the world someday. And so I went back to my teacher, Mrs. Parlier, the next day, and I said, okay, Mrs. Parlier, I've decided I'm going to change the world. What do I do now? Now, of course, they don't teach you in teacher college how to answer that question. So she just kind of looked at me for a minute, and then she went into her drawer, and she pulled out a packet of 50 pages of fractions, and she gave it to me. And you know what? I trusted Mrs. Parlier so much that I did those 50 pages of fractions over the weekend. Like, if she says this is what I got to do, I'm doing this 50 pages of fractions. And I came back and gave her, what next? Another 50 pages of fractions. Now, here's what I learned in that. I don't know if that was Mrs. Parlier's intention, but I learned that being great requires great work. You have to work hard. You have to be willing to do what other people are not willing to do. It doesn't matter where you start, it matters where you finish. You choose your destiny. And so I made a choice at 9 years old. I was going to be great. Every decision you make matters. I chose at 9 years old that I was going to do something great with my life. And I made a decision that school, I was going to make every second count in school. And so while other kids were playing, I even as a 9-year-old started learning Hebrew and Arabic. I knew that if I was going to change the world, I had to speak the languages of the world. And so while other kids played, I studied. And as I got into middle school, I began to learn French. My father began to teach at a school in Switzerland where we could learn French, and we stayed there for 6 weeks every summer, and I was determined I was going to be fluent in French. So by 12, I was fluent in English, Dutch, and French. And I was determined I was going to change the world someday. And as I approached high school, I had a really critical decision to make in my life. Because in my country, in the Netherlands, as in much of Western Europe, there is no drinking age, there's no smoking age, and you can use marijuana legally in public. And as I thought about that as an 8th grader at 13 years old, who do I want to be? I made a very conscious choice, 13 years old. I will never touch alcohol. I will never touch drugs, and I will never smoke a cigarette. I didn't make that choice because I thought I was so good. I made that choice because I knew I wanted my life to matter. And what that meant for me is that I had a very lonely high school life because there weren't a whole lot of other kids who were like me. Almost everyone drank and smoked. That was part of the culture. But here's what I'll tell you. This is a picture up here of me as a freshman on the varsity baseball team. As a freshman, I also made varsity basketball. That was not by accident. I worked hard, and I made sacrifices. And by my sophomore year, I was captain and MVP of all 3 sports, soccer, basketball, and baseball. Not because I was naturally the most gifted, but I was the kid who stayed after practice and worked hard. I ran sprints on the weekends. I shot shots. I would ride my bike 45 minutes away to the only basketball court we had in our entire city. And I'd shoot 100 free throws. I knew that if I was going to be the best, I had to be the best at everything. If I was going to change the world, I had to be willing to make certain choices. And the choice that would ultimately change my life was my decision at 18 years old to come to the United States and to go to college. And so I came here to the United States. I came to a country that I had really only seen on TV. We'd gotten the Cosby Show when I was a junior in high school, And I thought every person who looked like me lived like the Cosbys. I wanted to be Claire Huxtable, and I got my hair cut just like Claire Huxtable. Lasted about a day, but I tried. And there I was in the United States at a great college called Bryn Mawr, the sister school to Princeton University. And I became aware that because of how I looked and because of where I had come from, I was now an outcast. Because back in 1989, as a black woman, we were seen as less than in our community. And so I heard the N-word for the first time. And I was told on campus, you know you're only here because we have to have 10 black girls here. Not because I had a 3.9 GPA. Not because I was a triple varsity athlete or spoke 4 languages at that time. You're only here because we have to have 10 of you. And I began to listen to the messages of other people. And I began to make decisions based on what other people thought of me and not myself. And it took 1 year of college for me to believe that I could no longer change the world. That I was destined to clean toilets and kitchens because that's what I saw people who look like me doing. I suddenly lost my dream that was bigger than me, my dream to change the world. Be the best you can be. It doesn't matter where you start, it matters where you finish. Every choice you make matters. Be the best you. Do not let anyone else tell you who you can be. Anybody recognize who's in that picture? That's me at the White House last year. I got to go to the White House last year. It doesn't matter where you start, it matters where you finish. But I stopped letting other people tell me who I was going to be. And I made a choice. I made a choice to be a world changer. As a sophomore in college, I began to play street ball on the streets of Philadelphia, the only female playing. And as I played basketball on the streets of Philadelphia in some of the worst neighborhoods, I heard the stories of young men who looked like me, who were broken. Not one of them could read or write. Not one of them was going to school. Not one of them had graduated from high school. Not one of those young men knew anyone who had gone to college. And I suddenly knew at 19 years old, I know how I want to change the world. I want to do the one thing I have promised myself I will never do, be a teacher. I told myself for years, my parents are teachers, my cousins are teachers, my uncles are teachers, I will never be a teacher. Don't get paid enough, too many hours, nobody appreciates you. And at 19 years old, as I played basketball on the courts of Philadelphia with a bunch of black men who looked like me, who couldn't read, who couldn't write, who didn't believe they were going to be 21 because they were going to get shot by someone, I knew in my heart the way that I was going to change the world was one kid at a time, making sure that every student got a great education in the United States of America. Because in Europe, we had this vision of the US that everyone had a great car, everyone had a great life, everyone was a superstar. And here were these broken young men. And I knew because I'd had a great education, I knew what good schools look like. And I knew that if I could just reach one young man at a time, I could change my world. And I began that work 23 years ago. I've now taught in 4 states across the country, from Philadelphia to South Bend, Indiana, the home of Notre Dame, to Columbus, Ohio, to Tacoma, to Spokane, and now in Federal Way, Washington. And I come here today to tell you that for me, education is the greatest civil rights issue of our day. Our schools remain segregated. Our schools are still driven by zip code, language you speak at home, and color of your skin. The quality of the education you receive still is determined mostly by those things, and that, to me, is an issue of civil rights. And that is the dream, for me, that is bigger than me. And so I'm going to challenge you. Maybe your vision is not to become an educator. But whatever your vision is, I want you to understand that it doesn't matter where you start. It matters where you finish. I don't care how you grew up, whether you have 2 parents or no parents. You're a foster kid. You're adopted. A refugee. I don't care what happened to you last year. Maybe you had a bad year last year, last month. Choose today to become great and to live the rest of your life with greatness. Make conscious choices to be great. And determine in your heart that you are going to be the best you can possibly be. I have 3 children, as I told you. And I want to end by telling you a little bit about each of them, because they are truly my heroes. They're the reason that I continue to do the work I do. My oldest son, Malachi, is 19 years old. He just graduated from high school last year. And he has struggled his entire life with a writing disability called dysgraphia. Sort of similar to dyslexia, but it's the written form. And so he has struggled through school not being able to write and not feeling very successful. But my son Malachi has had the opportunity to sing at Carnegie Hall. My son Malachi last year auditioned for The Voice. Didn't make it. But you know what? If you don't ever try, guess what? You can't fail. I have taught my kids, you try, and you try, and you try again. And at 18 years old, he got to audition for The Voice. Next year, he most likely will be playing football in college. Incredible success. My daughter, who is adopted, her mother passed away when she was 9 years old. Her father's in prison, has been there for over 20 years. Just got her 3rd acceptance letter at college. Doesn't matter where you start, it matters where you finish. My baby son, Israel, who's not a baby, he's 6'5", 250 pounds. There's nothing small about him. I like to hold on that he's my baby, but he's not really a baby anymore. He's getting letters from MIT and Stanford as a black boy who loves math and science. It doesn't matter where you start, it matters where you finish. And so shoot high. Become the kind of person who will change the world. Some of you may change your community. Some of you are called to change your state. Some of you are called to change a region. Some of you are called to change a world. But be a change agent. Be determined to become the kind of person who will change your generation. Every day of high school, you are practicing the kind of person you are going to be as an adult. And so I'm going to tell you today, practice well. Live well. Believe in yourself. Love yourself. Quit trying to compare yourself to that girl over there, that boy over there, that person with the big car, that person with hair like that. Be your best self. And one of the things I believe about America is if each one of us was our best selves, we could become a great nation. So thank you very much.